B teams are part of the Portuguese football pyramid and are increasingly growing in number. This year, we saw 3 teams promoted: Sporting B to the 2nd tier, Vitória de Guimarães B to the 3rd, and Chaves B to the 4th. In 25-26, we will have 8 B teams spread across the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th tiers, and honestly, I believe this number will keep growing in the coming years. Personally, I don't like the existence of these teams. There's something magical for me about competition in football and discovering the cultural and historical characteristics of each club, and for me, seeing B teams is almost like opening a sticker pack and finding a duplicate. To me, it's literal visual pollution to see a Porto, Benfica or Sporting B among Leixões, Feirense and the like. However, I know they don't exist just on a whim. There are valid reasons that completely justify the existence of these teams, and that's exactly what we're gonna talk about today. In this video, I'm going to explain in detail why I and many other fans hate B teams, but I'll also show the other side of the coin and explain the incredible benefits that these teams have brought to Portuguese football. But first, let me give you some context. Although they've existed for many decades in Spain, Portugal only adopted the idea of B teams for the first time in 1999. Before that, clubs had partnerships with smaller clubs, the so-called satellite clubs, which is why there's such an abundance of clubs in Portugal with badges similar to Porto, Benfica, Sporting, and even Feirense. However, the concept of B teams gave more control to the parent clubs. Their young athletes would still be under their umbrella, close to the environment where they develop in the youth ranks, and would have access to competition. The problem is that in their first iteration, B teams couldn't go beyond the 3rd tier, the then called Segunda Divisão B. So, clubs were spending a lot of money to maintain a project that, although ambitious, didn't guarantee better development for their athletes, since the much desired competition was against low-level players who added little to their growth. It was simply better to loan players in bulk to smaller clubs in the top tier or others in the 2nd and 3rd levels depending on the athlete's quality than to maintain an entire team and its costs on their own. So, in 2006, just over 5 years after the introduction of this new concept, all teams had abandoned the idea. All except Marítimo. Jalma, Babá, Ruben Ferreira, Sami are all examples of players that Marítimo B helped develop over the years. And of course, I know we're not talking about world-class stars, but 3 of them ended up having stints at top clubs after performing well at Marítimo. Moreover, the B team from the Islanders was also used to give rhythm to out-of-form players, those without first-team opportunities or recovering from injuries. It was a winning formula, and their insistence on it when no one else was using it made other clubs reconsider the idea in the early 2010s. But this time, things had to be different. The Big 3 still didn't see it as profitable to support an entire squad and staff just to compete in the 3rd tier. So it was agreed that starting the 2012-13 season, the top 6 from the previous season, Porto, Benfica, Braga, Sporting, Marítimo and Vitória de Guimarães, would include a B team in the 2nd division, which led to an unprecedented increase from 16 to 22 teams. I admit that back then my perspective on team quality was completely wrong, and I mistakenly thought that from then on, the league would be dominated by the big clubs. I really thought it was inevitable for Benfica, Porto or maybe Sporting to win the 2nd division, but that didn't happen, at least not in the first season. In fact, B teams had little impact at all. Despite having promising youngsters like Cancelo, Eric Dyer or Fabio Martins playing in them, no B team was involved in the title fight, which, if we can even call it that, was controlled from early on by Belenenses. Most B teams were lost in the middle of the table, and Vitória even ended up relegated. At first, I thought the idea was funny. I was looking forward to B-team derbies, and as a Porto fan, I was obviously happy when Porto B won the 2nd division in 2016, especially in the dreadful season all around, with losses being the usual course of the day and a penalty shootout loss as a cherry on top. But over time, as my hardcore club loyalty faded and my general appreciation for football grew, I started to feel that these teams were simply taking the place of other clubs. From the moment the number of teams started to be reduced to the ideal 18, we began to see many normal teams relegated instead of B teams, and of course, one can argue that sporting performance is what matters most. And if a team has more points, it deserves to stay, regardless of being a B or an A team. But I'm a football romantic. In 2016, 5 teams were relegated, including several true historical teams of Portuguese football: Feirense, Atlético, Mafra, Oriental, and Oliveirense. While the 5 B teams that were competing that year, through easier or harder paths, managed to stay up. But Throne, didn't B teams eventually go down over the years? Yes, but not all of them, and the trend is that they continue to have success. Systematically, near the end of the season, if a B team is in trouble, the parent club always ends up giving them a huge advantage over their opponents. For example, Porto this year struggled all season. However, at serious risk of being relegated and losing an important tool when negotiating signings, André Villas-Boas invested in reinforcements: a Belarusian international Trofim Melnichenko, a player with several minutes for São Paulo's first team João Moreira, and most importantly, Leonardo Vonic, who scored 7 goals in half a season at the club. I don't want to be pessimistic, and without hiding my bias, of course I'd like to see Vonic become a star in the first team. But even his track record, it really seemed like a signing to patch up the offensive issues of the B team, which had never been fixed since Vandal left, and not necessarily a bet on the future of the striker position, since there are already younger and more talented options ahead of him. Passos was also struggling, and so were Oliveirense and Portimonense, but none of them had the financial muscle to bring in a Melnichenko or a Vonic. But even when there's no investment in signings, it's not uncommon for B teams to get a little boost from first team surplus players to help reach their goals, whether that's staying up or avoiding relegation. However, to be fair, this isn't as common as it used to be. On the other hand, there's also the argument that B teams are players that could be used by lower tier clubs where they would have a much greater impact. For example, Francisco Meixedo became a senior in 2020. Despite clearly never being seen as a potential first choice keeper for Porto, the Dragons kept him under contract as an occasional starter for the B team. During that time, many 3rd or 4th tier teams could have benefited from his services, but Meixedo isn't even a particularly egregious case. Hugo Felix, João Felix's brother, has been bouncing between Benfica's under-23s and B team since 2020. When it's obvious, he would benefit immensely from playing for a team like Leiria or Feirense, just to name a few. In essence, the big clubs create a massive monopoly of players, severely limiting the options available to teams competing in the same tiers as the B teams. But, as with everything in life, there's always the other side of the coin. And as much as I have my opinion, I also know that facts are facts. And the fact is that Portugal has benefited greatly from the introduction of B teams. In the past, new generations of young talents would produce one good player in the midst of a lot of dead weight. For example, Ronaldo was one of the very few players of his generation that we can consider world-class talents. At a high level, only João Moutinho, Nani and Quaresma made it. And the further back we go, the more evident this phenomenon becomes. Apart from the golden generation of 91, all youth national teams until the B team resurgence in 2012 were made of players who, although impressive as youngsters, often got lost or failed to reach their potential. From then on, the success rate became much higher, and just so you know, from the huge list of call-ups for the Nations League Final Four, only Diogo Jota, Bruno Fernandes, Ruben Neves and Rui Silva never played for B teams. But this didn't just happen now, the impact was immediate, as already the year 2016 squad featured 48% of players who had come through B teams. Moreover, as you know, money talks loudly. And up to 2020, 84 players who went through B teams ended up transferring to a top 5 league. And that's just until 2020. I couldn't find more recent data, but I wouldn't be shocked if the number had doubled in 5 years. Finally, and as hard as it is to admit, the Portuguese fan is more of a fan of their club than of football itself. And unfortunately, most are completely fixated on their club's matches. Before 2012, only 24% of second division games were broadcast on TV, but with the interest generated by B teams, that number went up to 100%. Part of me wishes this wasn't true, but overall, scrapping B teams would be a terrible idea. As much as it suffocates smaller clubs, as much as it feels wrong to see a Porto or Benfica in the middle of a second division table, as much as it's disappointing to see a B team getting promoted instead of a club like Feirense, Leixões or Marco, the truth is that Portuguese footballers need B teams. Instead of being lost in clubs that may or may not prioritize their development far from the eyes of the club they want to impress, young footballers now benefit from an ecosystem that protects them and prioritizes their development. Next year, we'll have 3 B teams. Do I like that? Hell no. But I'll try to remember how many Portuguese players are thriving the next time I complain about their existence. And what about you? Are you for or against B teams? Tell me what you think in the comments, and if you found this video interesting, don't forget to subscribe to Throne FC. I post informative videos about the past, present and future of Portuguese football that you, as the nerdy fan I know you are, won't want to miss. Like this analysis of the problem with SADs in Portugal. In that video, I analyze several failed cases and reflect on the pros and cons of them, just like I did in this one. Thanks for watching. I'll see you there.